The Great Hall had no walls. It floated in the empty space between galaxies, held together by forces that most species could not understand. Stars burned in the distance like tiny candles. Nebulae painted the darkness with colors that had no names. This was the conclave chamber, and it was the most important place in the known universe. Here, the oldest species gathered to discuss the fate of younger worlds. Here, decisions were made that could end civilizations or save them. Here, beings who had watched stars being born now sat in judgment over creatures who had only just learned to walk. The Velith were the first to arrive, as they always were. Their bodies were made of living crystal, and light passed through them in beautiful patterns. They did not speak with voices. Instead, they sent their thoughts directly into the minds of others. They were proud beings who believed they understood everything worth understanding. Next came the Morakan, massive creatures whose skin was the color of dying suns. They were warriors once, conquerors who had ruled 1,000 star systems through fear and power. But that was long ago. Now they were tired and old, and they came to the conclave seeking peace rather than war. The architects arrived in silence, as was their way. No one knew what they truly looked like because their bodies were made of dark matter, the invisible stuff that held galaxies together. They appeared as shadows, as absences of light, as shapes that the eye could not quite focus on. They rarely spoke, but when they did, everyone listened. There were others too. The singing ones, who communicated through music. The deep swimmers, who lived in the hearts of gas giants. The memory keepers, who had recorded every moment of history since the first stars ignited. Dozens of species, each older than humanity's sun, each powerful beyond measure, but none of them compared to the elders. The Kethvaran were the first. Not the first species in this galaxy, or even in this cluster of galaxies. They were the first thinking beings in the entire universe. When reality itself was young and hot and new, they had already existed. They had watched everything come into being. They had seen species rise and fall like waves on an endless ocean. They had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations, and they had grown very, very wise. Elder Theseus was the oldest of the elders, though such distinctions meant little when you had existed for billions of years. Its form was difficult to describe because it existed partially outside of normal space and time. Parts of it were here, in the conclave chamber. Other parts were scattered across the universe, existing in moments that had already passed, and moments that had not yet come. When Theseus moved, reality bent around it like water flowing around a stone. Today, the Elder rose from its throne. The throne was made of collapsed starlight, compressed into solid form through methods that even the architects did not understand. It was older than most galaxies. It had seen countless gatherings of the conclave, but it had never seen its occupant look quite so troubled. The chamber fell silent. Even the singing ones stopped their eternal music. When an elder wished to speak, everything else waited. "We must discuss the third spiral arm," Theseus said. Its voice did not travel through air because there was no air in the chamber. Instead, its words rippled through the fabric of space-time itself, reaching every mind present simultaneously. "We must discuss the pale blue world. We must discuss the species that calls itself human." For a long moment, no one reacted. Then, slowly, the chamber filled with something that might have been laughter if the beings present had been capable of such a simple thing. The Velith ambassador, a particularly bright crystal named Ketharan, sent its thoughts into the chamber. "The humans, Elder, surely you jest. They are children, infants. They have only just discovered how to travel faster than light. Their civilization is barely 300,000 years old. They still die of old age," one of the Morakan added, its deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Their bodies wear out after less than 100 years. They are made of soft tissue and fragile bone. A single solar flare could end their entire species. They cannot even photosynthesize," the Velith continued. "They must consume other living things to survive. They are primitives, Elder. Fascinating primitives, perhaps, but primitives nonetheless." Theseus listened to all of this without reaction. When the chamber had finished its amusement, the Elder spoke again. "They must be contained, or they must be destroyed. There is no middle path." The laughter stopped. "Destroyed?" Ketharan's crystal form flickered with surprise. "Elder, we do not destroy species simply for being young. That is not our way. We guide them. We teach them. We wait for them to mature. You do not understand, Theseus replied. You cannot understand. You are all too young. This statement caused a stir. The Velith were ancient. The Morakan had conquered galaxies before Earth's sun existed. The architects had built structures that spanned the spaces between stars. To call them young seemed almost insulting. But Theseus continued, unbothered by their reaction. I have seen their kind before. Once, in the universe that existed before this one. The chamber went very still. The universe that existed before this one. Most species did not even believe such a thing was possible. The current universe was everything, as far as they knew. The idea that there had been something before, something that had ended and been replaced, was deeply unsettling. They called themselves something different then, Theseus said. They looked different. They arose on a different world, in a different configuration of stars. But the pattern was the same. The hunger, the reaching, the refusal to accept any limit as final. What happened to them? One of the architects asked, its voice like the whisper of dark matter flowing through empty space. They grew. They spread. They did not conquer through war, though they were capable of war when pressed. They conquered through something far more dangerous. They connected. They made friends. They found common ground with species that had nothing in common. They traded, and laughed, and loved their way across the cosmos. That does not sound dangerous, Kethoran observed. No, it does not. Until you realize what it means. Theseus's form flickered, and for a moment, the other beings in the chamber caught a glimpse of memories older than the stars. They changed everything they touched. Not through force, through influence, through the simple, terrible power of their optimism. Optimism? The Morakan representative sounded confused. How can optimism be terrible? Because it spreads. Because it is infectious. Because once a species begins to hope the way humans hope, they cannot stop. They begin to believe that anything is possible. They begin to reach for things that should not be reached for. They begin to open doors that should remain closed. Theseus paused, and when it spoke again, its voice was heavy with the weight of ages. The universe before this one ended because of creatures like them, not through their malice, through their curiosity, through their absolute, unshakable belief that there was always something more to discover, always another boundary to cross, always another impossible thing to make possible. They found something that should not have been found. They woke something that should not have been woken. And everything ended. The chamber was silent. The beings present tried to imagine what Theseus was describing. An entire universe. Destroyed. Not by war or natural disaster, but by the simple act of exploration, by the refusal to accept that some doors should stay closed. Surely the humans are different, Kethoran said finally, though its voice lacked conviction. Surely they will learn caution as they age. They will not, Theseus replied. It is not in their nature. I have watched them, as I watch all young species. I have seen them face problems that should have destroyed them. Plagues, wars, climate disasters, asteroid impacts. Each time, they should have died. Each time, they should have surrendered to the inevitable. They never did. They built hospitals to fight the plagues. They created peace treaties to end the wars. They developed technology to heal their damaged world. They invented ships to carry them away from the asteroid's path. They refused, again and again, to accept that anything was truly impossible. Is that not admirable? One of the singing ones asked, its voice a melody of genuine curiosity. It is terrifying, Theseus answered, because they apply that same stubbornness to everything. They do not distinguish between problems that can be solved and problems that cannot. To them, every obstacle is simply a challenge that has not been overcome yet. Every limit is temporary. Every boundary is meant to be crossed. They are young now, weak, contained to a single arm of a single galaxy. But they will not stay that way. They will grow. They will spread. And they will not stop until they have touched every corner of existence. Then they will reach beyond existence. They will push against the walls of reality itself. And when those walls break, as they broke before, everything we have built will end. The chamber remained silent as the beings present considered these words. It was a lot to take in. The idea that humanity, that small and fragile species from an unremarkable world, could pose a threat to the entire universe seemed absurd. And yet, the elders did not speak lightly. They did not make predictions without cause. Finally, Cathoran spoke. What would you have us do, Elder? Destroy them? Send fleets to their homeworld and wipe them from existence? If necessary, Theseus replied. Though I would prefer containment. We could limit their access to faster-than-light technology. We could establish boundaries that they are forbidden to cross. We could slow their expansion until we determine whether they can be taught caution. That seems extreme, the Moricon representative said. We do not punish species for crimes they have not yet committed. That is not justice. This is not about justice, Theseus said. This is about survival. The survival of everything that exists. The debate continued for what would have been days by human measurement. Though time meant little in the space between galaxies, arguments were made on both sides. The Moricons spoke of their own violent past and how they had learned peace. The singing ones suggested that humanity might be guided toward wisdom through art and culture. The memory keepers noted that no species had ever destroyed a universe before, suggesting that Theseus's fears might be exaggerated. In the end, the conclave reached a compromise. They would not destroy humanity. They would not even actively contain them. Instead, they would establish an observation force to monitor human expansion. If humanity showed signs of becoming the threat Theseus predicted, the conclave would act. But for now, they would simply watch and wait. Theseus accepted this decision with something that might have been resignation. You are making a mistake, the elder said. I have seen this pattern before. I have watched it unfold across billions of years. But I understand that you must make your own choices, as all beings must. I only ask that you remember this moment. Remember that you were warned. Remember that you had the chance to act and chose not to. When the time comes, and it will come, remember that you could have stopped them, and you chose not to believe. The conclave adjourned. The great beings returned to their far-flung homes across the cosmos. The Velith went back to their crystal worlds. The Moricon returned to their ancient warships, now converted to peaceful purposes. The architects faded into the darkness between stars, and on a small blue world in the third spiral arm, completely unaware that their fate had just been debated by beings older than time, humanity continued to dream. They built telescopes to look at the stars. They launched probes to explore their solar system. They developed theories about faster-than-light travel that their scientists said were impossible. They dreamed of meeting other species, of exploring the cosmos, of finding their place in the vast universe they had only just begun to understand. They had no idea that the oldest beings in existence had just declared them a potential threat to reality itself. They had no idea that they had been judged and found dangerous. They only knew that the stars were out there, waiting to be explored. And for humanity, that was enough. That was all that had ever mattered. The stars were calling, and humanity was going to answer. In the conclave chamber, now empty except for shadows and starlight, Elder Theseus remained on its throne. The ancient being stared out at the distant galaxies, watching the slow dance of cosmic structures that it had observed since the beginning of time. They will come, it said to no one. They will spread and grow and change everything they touch. And when they reach the boundaries of what is possible, they will not stop. They will push through. They will break the walls. And then we will all see what lies beyond. The elder fell silent, lost in memories of a universe that no longer existed. A universe that had ended because beings very much like humans had refused to accept that some things were not meant to be known. History, Theseus knew, had a tendency to repeat itself. And humanity, whether they knew it or not, was following a very old path. A path that led to either salvation or destruction, perhaps both. The stars burned on, indifferent to the fates of the tiny creatures that lived among them. Time passed, as it always did, and somewhere in the third spiral arm, a young species continued to dream of the impossible. They did not know what was coming, but they would face it the only way they knew how, with hope, with stubbornness, with the unshakable belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. That was the human way, and it could not be stopped. 50 years passed. To the ancient species of the conclave, 50 years was nothing. It was less than the blink of an eye. It was the time between one heartbeat and the next. The Velith did not even bother to update their records. The Moricon barely noticed. The elders continued their eternal contemplation, undisturbed by such a tiny passage of time. But to humanity, 50 years was everything. In 50 years, a child could be born, grow old, and die. In 50 years, new technologies could be invented, new nations could rise, new dreams could be realized. In 50 years, a species that had only just learned to leave its home planet could become something entirely different. And humanity had become very different indeed. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, humanity's first true deep space exploration vessel. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent staring at screens and making difficult decisions. She had been born on Earth, in a small city by the sea, but she had spent most of her life in space. It was the only place that felt like home anymore. Behind her, 200 crew members worked at their stations. Engineers monitored the ship's systems. Scientists analyzed data from distant stars. Pilots calculated courses through the void. They came from every nation on Earth, speaking dozens of languages, carrying the hopes and dreams of 8 billion people on their shoulders. Before them, space stretched endlessly in all directions. "Commander," said Lieutenant Chen, her communications officer. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of eager energy that Vasquez remembered from her own youth. "We are approaching the Kepler threshold." Vasquez nodded. She had been waiting for this moment for months. Years, really. Ever since she had first learned about the threshold, she had known that one day she would cross it. The Kepler threshold was an invisible line in space, known only through rumor and speculation. It marked the unofficial border where conclave territory began. No human had ever crossed it. No human had been allowed to cross it. The conclave had made their position clear. Humanity was too young, too primitive, too dangerous. They needed to wait. They needed to prove themselves. They needed to stay in their little corner of the galaxy and not cause trouble. Humanity had listened politely, and then they had built the Prometheus anyway. "All stations report ready," Lieutenant Chen continued. "The crew is standing by for your orders." Vasquez took a deep breath. In a few moments, she would either lead humanity into a new era of exploration and discovery, or she would start an interstellar incident that could result in the destruction of her entire species. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force, but she had not come this far to turn back. "Take us across," she said. The Prometheus moved forward, its engines burning bright against the darkness of space. Stars slid past on the view screen, ancient lights that had burned since before humanity existed. The ship crossed the invisible line that separated known space from the unknown. Nothing happened. For a moment, Vasquez allowed herself to hope that maybe the conclave did not care. Maybe they had forgotten about the threshold. Maybe humanity could simply slip through unnoticed. Then the view screen flickered. An image appeared, transmitted across vast distances through methods that humanity's scientists could not understand. It showed a being of living crystal, its form beautiful and terrible at the same time. Light passed through it in patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. This was a Velith, one of the oldest species in the known universe. "Human vessel," the being said. Its voice did not come through the ship's speakers. Instead, it appeared directly in the minds of everyone on board, a sensation that made several crew members gasp in surprise. "You have reached the boundary of civilized space. Turn back. Your species has not been granted passage. You are not ready." Vasquez stood straight and faced the view screen with all the dignity she could muster. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she did not let it show on her face. "With respect, Ambassador," she said, "we did not ask for permission." The Velith's form flickered with what might have been surprise. "You did not ask for permission? Human, do you understand what you are saying? We are the conclave. We have guided the development of civilizations for billions of years. When we say that a species is not ready, that species does not argue. Then consider this a first," Vasquez replied. "We are explorers, Ambassador. We go where curiosity takes us. We cross boundaries that others say cannot be crossed. It is what we do. It is what we have always done." "Curiosity?" The Velith's mental voice dripped with something that sounded like contempt. "Your species is 300,000 years old. You have barely learned to control your own planet. We were building structures the size of stars when your ancestors were still learning to walk upright. What could you possibly hope to find that we have not already discovered, studied, and filed away in our archives?" Vasquez smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had heard this kind of condescension before and had learned to ignore it. "Something new," she said. The Prometheus crossed the threshold completely and continued forward into conclave space. The Velith ambassador sputtered with indignation, but there was nothing it could do. The conclave had not authorized the use of force against humanity. They had assumed that the warning would be enough. They had assumed that a young species, faced with the displeasure of the oldest civilizations in the universe, would naturally fall into line. They had not counted on Commander Elena Vasquez. Within a month, the Prometheus had established contact with 3 different conclave species. Within 3 months, humanity had set up its first trading post on the edge of Velith territory. Within a year, 17 human colonies had sprung up across conclave space. It was not an invasion. Humanity did not conquer these worlds through force of arms. They could not have done so, even if they wanted to. The conclave's military power was beyond anything humanity could match. Instead, they conquered through something far more subtle. They made themselves useful. The first opportunity came on a world called Tethkar, a planet in the Moroccan territory that had been abandoned millions of years ago. The atmosphere was toxic. The gravity was crushing. The temperatures swung between extremes that would kill most species within hours. The Moroccan had written it off as uninhabitable. The Velith had never even bothered to survey it. The Conclave's records listed it as a dead world, useful only for mining operations that were too dangerous to be worth the effort. Humanity looked at Tethkar and saw opportunity. They built domes that filtered the toxic air. They created gravity generators that made the crushing weight bearable. They developed temperature control systems that kept their habitats comfortable regardless of the conditions outside. Within 2 years, Tethkar had a population of 50,000 humans, living and working on a world that everyone else had given up on. This pattern repeated again and again. Worlds that the Conclave considered worthless became human settlements. Environments that the ancient species could not tolerate became human homes. Resources that were too difficult to extract became human industries. Humanity adapted. It was what they did best. But adaptation was only part of the story. The real shock came when the Velith discovered that humans had been trading with the deep swimmers. The deep swimmers were a species that lived in the hearts of gas giants, beings of compressed matter that existed under pressures that would destroy any normal creature. They had no solid bodies, no faces, no way to interact with the physical world that other species inhabited. For millions of years, they had existed in isolation, unable to communicate with anyone outside their crushing homes. No one had ever successfully traded with them. No one had ever even tried. Humans tried. They developed probes that could survive the descent into gas giant atmospheres. They created communication systems that could translate between human thoughts and the deep swimmers' strange pressure wave language. They spent years learning how to understand beings that were completely unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, and then they started trading. The deep swimmers, it turned out, produced compounds that were incredibly valuable for medical research. They had been producing these compounds for millions of years, but no one had ever been able to collect them. Humans developed collection methods. They established trade routes. They gave the deep swimmers something they had never had before, a connection to the wider galaxy. The Velith ambassador Kethoran sent urgent reports back to the Conclave. They are not conquering, Kethoran wrote, its thoughts transcribed into official documents. They are not fighting, they are spreading. And everywhere they go, they make friends, they trade, they learn, they teach, they marry other species. I have confirmed reports of humans taking Moroccan partners. They adopt alien orphans. They find common ground with beings who have been enemies for eons. They are a virus of connection. The Conclave did not know how to respond. They had dealt with aggressive species before. They had dealt with expansionist species before. They had even dealt with species that tried to conquer through economic means before. But they had never dealt with a species that conquered through friendship. On world after world, humans arrived with smiles on their faces and hands extended in greeting. They learned local customs. They shared their own. They showed genuine interest in species that had been ignored or dismissed by the Conclave for millions of years. They asked questions. This, perhaps more than anything else, confused the ancient species. Humans asked questions constantly. Why did the Velith grow in crystal formations? How did the Moroccan produce their famous energy weapons? What was it like to be an architect, existing as dark matter in the spaces between stars? These were questions that no one had asked for millions of years. The Conclave species had long since concluded that they understood everything worth understanding. They had stopped being curious. Humans had not stopped being curious. Humans, it seemed, could never stop being curious. And with their questions came ideas. A human engineer suggested a new design for Velith power systems that increased efficiency by 15%. The Velith had been using the same design for 12 million years. No one had ever thought to improve it. A human artist created a sculpture that the architects actually responded to, breaking their usual silence to express something that might have been appreciation. It was the first time anyone could remember an architect showing interest in another species' culture. A human diplomat negotiated a trade agreement between the Morakan and the deep swimmers, two species that had never even acknowledged each other's existence. The deal benefited both sides and created connections that had never existed before. The conclave watched all of this with growing concern. They are changing things, Kethoran reported. They are disrupting patterns that have existed for millions of years. They are making the old seem new, and the impossible seem possible. I do not know if this is dangerous, but it is certainly unprecedented. In the conclave chamber, Elder Theseus received these reports and felt the cold grip of recognition. This was exactly what it had feared. This was exactly what it had warned about. Humanity was not conquering through force. They were conquering through connection. They were changing the galaxy simply by being themselves, and they had only been in conclave space for a year. What would they be like in a decade? In a century? In 1,000 years? Theseus remembered the universe that had existed before. It remembered the species that had been so similar to humanity. It remembered how they had changed everything they touched, how they had made the impossible possible, how they had eventually reached too far and brought everything crashing down. The pattern was repeating, but the conclave would not listen. They saw humanity as an annoyance, perhaps, or a curiosity. They did not see them as a threat. They could not imagine that such young, fragile creatures could pose any danger to civilizations that had existed for billions of years. Theseus knew better, but knowing was not the same as being able to act. The Elder watched as humanity spread across the stars, making friends and building connections and changing everything they touched. It watched as the old order began to shift in ways that no one had anticipated. It watched as the first cracks appeared in structures that had been stable for millions of years. And it waited, because the Elder knew that this was only the beginning. The humans would continue to grow. They would continue to spread. They would continue to ask questions and find answers and reach for things that should not be reached for. And eventually, they would find something that would change everything. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Commander Elena Vasquez looked out at the stars and smiled. They had done it. They had crossed the threshold. They had entered conclave space and made it their own. They had proven that humanity would not be stopped by lines on a map or warnings from ancient beings. There was so much more to explore, so many more worlds to visit, so many more species to meet, so many more questions to ask and mysteries to solve. The universe was vast and old and full of wonders that humanity had only begun to imagine, and humanity was going to see all of it. Vasquez did not know about the Elder's warnings. She did not know that the oldest being in the universe considered her species a threat to reality itself. She only knew that the stars were calling, and she intended to answer. "Set a course for the next system," she ordered. "Let us see what else is out there." The Prometheus turned and headed deeper into the unknown. Behind it, the conclave watched and waited, and in the spaces between galaxies, Elder Theseus felt something it had not felt in billions of years. Fear, because it knew what was coming, even if no one else did. The shattered expanse stretched across 10,000 light-years of space, and every inch of it was haunted by the dead. Once, this region had been beautiful. Stars had burned bright here. Planets had orbited in perfect patterns. Life had flourished on 1,000 different worlds, each one unique and precious in its own way. That was before the war. Now the shattered expanse was a graveyard. Stars had been extinguished by weapons beyond imagination. Planets had been reduced to asteroid fields. The light itself seemed wounded, as if even photons were reluctant to travel through space that had seen so much suffering. The Morakan and the architects had been fighting here for 11 million years. No one remembered how the war had started. The Morakan claimed that the architects had destroyed one of their colony worlds without provocation. The architects said that the Morakan had attacked their construction sites and murdered their workers. Both sides had evidence. Both sides had grievances. Both sides had spent millions of years adding to the list of wrongs that needed to be avenged. Generations of Morakan had been born, lived, and died in this war. Architects had been created, existed, and dissolved without ever knowing peace. The fighting had become so normal that neither side could imagine any other way of existing. The conclave had tried to negotiate peace countless times. Every attempt had failed. The hatred ran too deep. The wounds were too fresh, even though the original wounds had been inflicted millions of years ago. Every battle created new casualties, new martyrs, new reasons to keep fighting. It was the longest war in the history of the universe, and it was about to be changed by a man who just wanted to pay off his mortgage. Captain Marcus Webb was not a warrior. He was not a diplomat. He was not a hero in any traditional sense of the word. He was a 53-year-old freight hauler from New Detroit, a human colony that had been established in conclave space about 40 years ago. He had bad knees, a slight belly, and a coffee addiction that his doctor kept telling him to address. His ship, the Jenny's Hope, was a converted cargo hauler that had seen better days. The hull was patched in several places. The engines made concerning noises during hard burns. The coffee maker in the galley was the only thing on the ship that worked perfectly, because Marcus had personally overhauled it 3 times. Marcus had named the ship after his daughter, who was back on New Detroit finishing her medical degree. He was hauling cargo to pay her tuition fees and to slowly chip away at the mountain of debt that the ship had cost him. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest, and it kept him flying among the stars, which was all he had ever really wanted. He had not meant to jump into the middle of a war zone. The navigation error was small, barely noticeable in the grand scheme of interstellar distances, but space was big, and small errors could have enormous consequences. Instead of emerging from faster-than-light travel in the safe corridor that merchant ships used to cross the shattered expanse, the Jenny's Hope found itself directly between 2 fleets of warships. Moroccan destroyers filled the space to his left, massive vessels bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Architect ships floated to his right, dark and strange, and barely visible against the blackness of space. Both fleets had been preparing to engage each other when the Jenny's Hope appeared between them like a rabbit wandering onto a highway. For a long moment, nothing happened. Both sides were too surprised to react. Then the shooting started. Weapons fire filled the space around the Jenny's Hope. Energy beams crossed in front of Marcus's view screen. Missiles streaked past his hull. The ship's alarms started screaming, filling the bridge with noise and flashing red lights. "What the hell?" Marcus shouted, grabbing the controls and trying to maneuver his slow, ungainly cargo ship out of the crossfire. "I'm a civilian. I'm not armed. What are you people doing?" No one answered. The 2 fleets were too focused on destroying each other to worry about one lost cargo ship. Marcus did what any sensible person would do. He ran. He pushed the Jenny's Hope's engines as hard as they would go and headed for the edge of the combat zone, hoping to escape before a stray shot turned his ship into debris. He almost made it. Then he saw the Moroccan destroyer. It had taken a direct hit from an architect weapon, and its hull was venting atmosphere. Marcus could see the damage clearly on his sensors. A massive hole in the ship's side, atmosphere rushing out into space, life support failing. There were survivors inside that ship. He could detect their life signs, weak but present. They were dying. Marcus Webb was not a hero. He had never thought of himself as particularly brave or noble. He was just a guy who hauled cargo and drank too much coffee and worried about his daughter and his debts. But he could not fly away and leave people to die. He did not even think about it. He just acted. The Jenny's Hope swung around and headed toward the damaged destroyer. Marcus extended his cargo bay doors and fired his maneuvering thrusters, bringing his ship as close to the hull breach as he could manage. He was not equipped for rescue operations. He did not have the proper equipment or training, but he had a cargo bay with atmosphere, and he had a ship that could hold survivors, and that would have to be enough. "Attention Moroccan vessel," he broadcast on all frequencies. "This is the cargo ship Jenny's Hope. I am attempting rescue operations. If you can hear me, direct your survivors toward my cargo bay. I repeat, I am here to help." He did not know if they understood him. He did not know if they would trust a human. He only knew that he was going to try. The first survivors came through the breach 10 minutes later. They were Moroccan soldiers, huge beings with skin like cooling lava and eyes that burned with ancient fire. They were injured and scared and confused, and they looked at Marcus Webb like they could not understand what they were seeing. A human, rescuing their enemies. No, not their enemies, just people who were hurt and needed help. Marcus did not have time to explain. More survivors were coming through the breach. He directed them to the far end of his cargo bay and told them to stay calm and not touch anything. He offered them water and emergency blankets from his ship's stores. He treated them like people, not combatants. The Moricon did not know how to react. Some of them tried to thank him. Others just stared in confusion. One of them, a commander by the markings on his uniform, asked Marcus why he was doing this. "Because you needed help," Marcus said simply. "That is what you do when people need help. You help them." The commander did not have a response to that. Then the architect survivors arrived. They came floating through the chaos of the battlefield. Beings of dark matter who had escaped their own damaged vessels. They were enemies of the Moricon. They had been fighting and killing each other for 11 million years. By all logic, their presence in the same cargo bay should have started a battle. Marcus did not give them the chance. "All right, everyone settle down," he announced, standing between the two groups of survivors like a schoolteacher managing unruly children. "I do not care who you are, or what you have been fighting about. You are on my ship now. And on my ship, we do not fight. We sit down, we drink coffee, and we act like civilized beings." "You cannot be serious," the Moricon commander said. "These are architects. They are our enemies. They have killed millions of our people, and you have killed millions of theirs," Marcus replied. "I am sure everyone here has very good reasons for hating each other. But right now, you are all injured and scared and floating in my cargo bay in the middle of a war zone. So you can either keep fighting and probably die, or you can shut up and drink some coffee while the adults figure this out." He pulled out a portable heating unit and started making coffee. Actual earth coffee. The good stuff that he saved for special occasions. He poured it into disposable cups and started handing them out. First to the Moricon, then to the architects. The architects did not drink coffee. They did not drink anything, as far as anyone knew. But they accepted the cups anyway, holding them in their dark matter tendrils like precious objects. "Sit," Marcus commanded. "Drink. Be quiet." And somehow, impossibly, they did. Enemies who had slaughtered each other's children for 11 million years sat in the cargo bay of a human freight hauler and shared coffee in silence. They did not talk. They did not fight. They just sat there, surrounded by the strange smell of roasted earth beans, and waited for something to happen. Marcus Webb sat down between them and took a sip of his own coffee. "You are all idiots," he said conversationally. "I want you to know that. You have all this power, all this technology, all these ships and weapons and resources, and what do you use them for? Killing each other, over and over again, for millions of years, over something that nobody even remembers. My grandmother had a saying," he continued. "She said that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You have all been drinking poison for 11 million years. How is that working out for you?" The Moricon commander started to respond, but Marcus held up his hand. "I am not finished. I am just a cargo hauler. I have debts and bad knees and a daughter who keeps telling me to eat better. I am nobody important. But even I can see that what you are doing is insane. You have been fighting for so long that you have forgotten what peace feels like. You have been hating for so long that you do not know any other way to exist. And for what? For pride? For revenge? For reasons that nobody even remembers?" He looked at the Moricon survivors. Then he looked at the architects. "You are all just people. Weird, alien people, who I do not really understand, but still people. You hurt, you bleed, you lose loved ones, you grieve, and on the other side of every battle, there are beings just like you who are hurting and bleeding and grieving too. This war is not protecting anyone. It is just creating more suffering, more death, more orphans and widows and empty places where loved ones used to be. Is that really what you want? Is that really worth 11 million years?" The cargo bay was silent. Outside, the battle continued. Ships exploded and lives ended and the ancient war ground on. But inside the Jenny's Hope, something had changed. The Moricon commander looked at the architect survivors across the bay. For the first time in his very long life, he did not see enemies. He saw beings who were just as tired and hurt and confused as he was. "I do not remember why we started fighting," he admitted quietly. "I know the official history. I know the list of grievances. But the real reason, the thing that made us hate each other so much that we could never stop, I do not know what that was." One of the architects responded, its voice like the whisper of dark matter flowing through space. Neither do we. We have been fighting for so long that the war itself has become the only thing we know. It defines us. It shapes us. Without it, we do not know who we are. Then maybe, Marcus said carefully, it is time to find out. He did not know if his words would make a difference. He was just a cargo hauler who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. But he had spoken his truth, and that was all anyone could do. The survivors stayed in his cargo bay for 6 hours, until the battle finally ended and rescue ships arrived. During that time, enemies talked to each other for the first time in millions of years. They shared stories about their lives, their families, their hopes and fears. They discovered that they had more in common than they had ever imagined. When the Morakan rescue ships arrived, the commander turned to Marcus before leaving. "You have given us something today," he said. "I do not know what it is yet, but I think it might be hope." "That is the only thing worth giving," Marcus replied. The war did not end that day. 11 million years of hatred could not be dissolved by one conversation in a cargo bay. But something had started. A crack had appeared in the wall of hate that separated two species. Over the following months, more cracks appeared. Morakan commanders began reaching out to architect leaders. Secret negotiations started in neutral locations. For the first time in millions of years, both sides began to imagine what peace might look like. And it had all started because a cargo hauler from New Detroit had refused to leave people to die. The story spread across the galaxy. Humans told it proudly. Other species told it with wonder. Even the Conclave took notice. In the great chamber between galaxies, Elder Theseus heard about the incident and felt that cold grip of fear grow stronger. This was what it had warned about. This was the human pattern in action. They did not conquer through force. They changed things through simple acts of compassion that somehow grew into something much larger. A cargo hauler and some coffee had done what millions of years of diplomacy had failed to accomplish, and humans did not even see it as remarkable. To them, it was just what you did. You helped people who needed help. You treated enemies like people. You offered coffee and kindness and expected nothing in return. It was beautiful. It was terrifying, and it could not be stopped. 2 centuries had passed since Commander Elena Vasquez crossed the Kepler threshold. In 200 years, humanity had spread across 300 star systems. They had established colonies on worlds that other species considered uninhabitable. They had created trade networks that connected civilizations which had never spoken to each other before. They had married aliens, adopted alien children, and built families that spanned the gaps between species. They had ended 4 ancient wars. The conflict between the Morakan and the architects had finally, after 11 million years, come to a close. Other, smaller wars had followed the same pattern. Humans appeared, asked uncomfortable questions, offered coffee and compassion, and somehow made peace seem possible where before it had seemed impossible. The galaxy was changing. The Velith noticed it first. Their crystal minds were sensitive to patterns, and the pattern they observed was deeply troubling. Species that had existed in isolation for millions of years were now trading with each other. Civilizations that had been stagnant were now innovating. Ideas were spreading faster than ever before, jumping from world to world through human networks. The old order was shifting, and humanity was at the center of all of it. In the conclave chamber, debates raged about what to do. Some species wanted to embrace the changes. They saw humanity as a gift, a source of new ideas and new connections that could revitalize civilizations that had grown old and tired. Others saw humans as a threat, a disruptive force that was upending traditions and structures that had existed since before humanity's sun had formed. Elder Theseus watched it all without comment. The ancient being had given its warning 2 centuries ago. No one had listened. Now the consequences of that choice were unfolding exactly as Theseus had predicted. But even the Elder had not anticipated what would happen next. It began with an exploration mission. The UES Horizon, a ship crewed by humans and representatives from 6 different conclave species, was mapping the edges of known space. They had traveled farther than any vessel had gone before, into regions that even the Elders had marked as forbidden. The Void Beyond Voids, it was called. A region of space so empty that light itself seemed reluctant to enter. Stars were rare here. Planets were almost non-existent. Most species believed that nothing could live in such a place. They were wrong. The horizon's sensors detected them first. A billion ships, hanging motionless in the darkness. Each one was enormous, larger than anything the Conclave had ever built. They were covered in symbols that no one recognized, written in languages that had been dead for longer than most stars had burned. The Sleepers. They were a myth, a legend, a story that the elders told to frighten younger species into good behavior. No one had actually believed they existed, but here they were. A fleet of 1 billion ships, carrying weapons that could unmake stars, an armada left behind by a civilization so ancient that even the elders knew them only through fragments of memory and whispered stories. They had gone to sleep eons ago, when the universe was young and different. They had set guardians to watch over their slumber, and they had left instructions. When the time was right, they would wake and reclaim what was theirs, the galaxy. All of it. The Horizon sent its report back to the Conclave, and the effect was immediate. Panic spread through civilizations that had existed for billions of years. Emergency sessions were called. Fleets were mobilized. Ancient weapons that had not been used since the dawn of time were pulled out of storage and prepared for deployment. The Conclave's response was unified and decisive. Seal the region. Destroy any maps that showed its location. Set up warning beacons to prevent any ships from approaching. And above all, pray that the Sleepers never woke. Humanity had a different idea. Admiral Chen Wei stood before the Conclave assembly. A single human facing the collected might of the oldest civilizations in the universe. She was old by human standards, nearly 90. But her mind was sharp and her voice was steady. "We need to talk to them," she said. The chamber erupted in chaos. "Talk to them?" The Velith ambassador shouted, its crystal form flashing with agitation. "They are the Sleepers. They are the end of all things. The stories say that when they wake, they will sweep across the stars and destroy everything in their path." "Stories," Chen Wei replied calmly. "That is all you have. Stories, legends, myths passed down through billions of years until no one knows what is true and what is fantasy. The elders themselves have warned us about the Sleepers," the Moricon representative growled. "They were there when the Sleepers went to sleep. They know what they are capable of." Chen Wei turned to look at Elder Theseus, who had been watching the proceedings in silence. "With respect, Elder," she said, "what do you actually know about the Sleepers? Not what you assume or fear. What do you know?" Theseus was silent for a long moment. When it spoke, its voice was heavy with the weight of ages. "We know that they were old when we were young. We know that they built weapons that could reshape reality. We know that they considered the universe their property and all other life forms as intruders. And why did they go to sleep?" Chen Wei pressed. Another long silence. "We do not know," Theseus admitted. "That memory has been lost, so you do not know why they slept. You do not know why they might wake. You do not know what they want, or what they fear, or what might convince them to share the galaxy with the rest of us." Chen Wei spread her hands. "You have been making decisions based on fear and ignorance for billions of years. Maybe it is time to try something different." "Something different?" the Velith ambassador sputtered. "You want us to send a diplomatic mission to beings who could destroy us with a thought? That is not diplomacy, Admiral. That is suicide." "Maybe," Chen Wei acknowledged. "But hiding will not save us. It never does. If the Sleepers want to wake, they will wake. If they want to destroy us, they will destroy us. Our only chance is to find out what they actually want and see if we can find common ground. They are ancient beyond measure. They have power that we cannot comprehend. What possible common ground could we find with such beings?" Chen Wei smiled, a gentle expression that somehow conveyed both sadness and hope. "They are alive," she said. "They think. They feel. They made choices. They went to sleep for a reason. And they have stayed asleep for a reason. Somewhere inside those billion ships, there are beings with hopes and fears and desires, just like the rest of us. We have spent 2 centuries finding common ground with species that everyone said were too different, too hostile, too alien to reach. We have made friends out of enemies and partners out of strangers. If we can do that with the Moricon and the Architects, if we can do that with the Deep Swimmers and the Singing Ones, then maybe we can do it with the Sleepers too. And if we cannot," she added quietly, "then at least we will have tried. I would rather die reaching out my hand in friendship than live knowing I never even made the attempt." The Conclave debated for days. Factions formed and arguments erupted. and ancient alliances were tested to their breaking point. In the end, the decision came down to a simple vote. The Velith voted against the mission. So did most of the elder species, those who had grown cautious with age and preferred the safety of inaction. But the younger species voted in favor. The Morakan, who had learned from humanity what peace could look like, threw their support behind the plan. The architects, who had spent 11 million years at war and now understood the value of taking risks for peace, joined them. The deep swimmers, who had only learned that the wider galaxy existed because humans had reached out to them, argued passionately for the mission. In the end, the vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would send a diplomatic mission to the sleepers. The ship was called the Olive Branch. It was unarmed, carrying no weapons of any kind. Its hull was painted white and covered with symbols of peace from every species in the conclave. Its crew was made up entirely of volunteers, humans and aliens alike who understood that they might be flying to their deaths. Captain Sarah Okonkwo commanded the mission. She was 42 years old, a career diplomat who had helped negotiate 3 of the peace treaties that humanity was famous for. She had a husband back on Earth and 2 children who she might never see again. She had volunteered anyway. Someone has to go, she told her family before she left. Someone has to try. If not us, then who? The Olive Branch traveled for weeks through the empty darkness of the void beyond voids. The crew watched their sensors and held their breath and prepared themselves for whatever might come. When they finally reached the sleeper fleet, they found 1 billion ships floating in perfect formation. Each one was the size of a small moon. Each one was covered in weapons that sensors could not even fully analyze. The power output of a single sleeper vessel was greater than some stars, and they were all starting to wake up. Alarms rang throughout the Olive Branch as the sleeper ships began to power up. Lights flickered on across hulls that had been dark for eons. Engines that had been silent since before humanity's ancestors had crawled out of the ocean rumbled to life. Ancient weapons charged, building up energy that could crack planets. "Captain," the sensor officer said, his voice tight with fear. "They are targeting us." Captain Okonkwo closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. Either humanity's faith in the power of connection was justified, or it was about to get them all killed. "Open all communication channels," she ordered. "Broadcast on every frequency we can reach." "What should we send?" Okonkwo thought about it. Words seemed inadequate. Any language they used would be foreign to beings who had been asleep since before language as they knew it had existed. Threats were pointless against such overwhelming power. Pleas would likely be ignored. What could they possibly send that would matter to creatures who had existed since the dawn of time? Then she remembered something that Admiral Chenwei had told her before the mission launched. "When in doubt," the Admiral had said, "remember what makes us human. Not our technology or our tactics, or our clever words. Our emotions, our passion, our ability to feel and express what we feel in ways that transcend language and logic. Send our music," Okonkwo decided. "Our music, Captain? All of it. Every song humanity has ever recorded. Every piece of music from every culture throughout our entire history. Lullabies and battle hymns, love songs and dirges, folk melodies and symphonies. Everything we have ever felt, expressed through sound." The communications officer looked uncertain, but he did as he was told. The transmission went out, a vast wave of human emotion encoded in sound. Millions of songs, representing millions of lives, carrying the weight of everything humanity had ever experienced. The sleeper fleet stopped. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The weapons remained charged. The ships remained powered up. The Olive Branch hung in space, tiny and fragile, waiting to learn if it would live or die. Then a response came. It was not words. It was not an attack. It was something else entirely. Something that the crew of the Olive Branch struggled to understand. The sleeper overmind was reaching out to them. It was a presence unlike anything they had ever encountered. A consciousness so vast that it made the human mind feel like a candle flame next to a star. It touched their thoughts, not invasively, but gently, like a curious child reaching out to touch something new and strange. And it asked a question. The question was not in words. It was in emotions, in sensations, in something deeper than language. But Captain Okonkwo understood it anyway. "What are you?" She did not know how to respond. How do you explain humanity to a being that had existed since before your species had evolved? How do you summarize 300,000 years of history, culture, achievement, and struggle in a way that something so ancient could understand? She decided to keep it simple. We are humanity, she said out loud, hoping that her meaning would carry through whatever connection the Overmind had established. We are new here. We wanted to introduce ourselves. The Overmind's presence flickered with something that might have been surprise. You are small, it observed. Brief. Fragile. Your lives are sparks. Your history is a moment. Why do you not fear us? We do fear you, Okonkwo admitted. We are terrified. But fear is not a reason to hide. Fear is just the beginning of courage. She paused, searching for the right words. We have learned that the scariest things usually turn out to be the most interesting. We have learned that reaching out is always better than running away. We have learned that even the oldest, most powerful beings in the universe are still just beings, with thoughts and feelings and reasons for what they do. You went to sleep for a reason. You have stayed asleep for a reason. We want to understand what those reasons are. We want to know who you are, not who the legends say you are. The Overmind was silent, processing this response. In the conclave chamber, countless light years away, Elder Theseus felt the sleepers stir and knew that the moment of truth had arrived. Everything depended on what happened next. Everything humanity had built. Everything the conclave had protected. Everything that existed in the universe might be about to end, or something new might be about to begin. On the olive branch, Captain Okonkwo waited, and hoped. It was all she could do. It was all any of them could do. The universe held its breath. Across 300 star systems, humans stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. They did not know exactly what was happening in the void beyond voids. They did not know that the fate of everything rested on a single unarmed ship and its crew of volunteers, but they felt something. A tension in the fabric of existence itself. A sense that something important was about to happen. On 1,000 different worlds, members of the conclave species waited with equal anxiety. The Velith suspended their crystal meditations. The Morakan put down their ancient weapons and stood in silence. The architects ceased their eternal construction projects and turned their attention toward the distant darkness where the sleepers stirred. Even Elder Theseus, who had existed since the beginning of time, found itself unable to look away. In the center of it all, floating in the cold darkness of the void beyond voids, the olive branch waited for the sleeper Overmind to respond. The presence that surrounded them was vast beyond measure. It was older than stars, deeper than space, more complex than any mind that currently existed in the universe. It had been dreaming for eons, lost in contemplation of things that no other being could understand, and now it had been woken by something completely unexpected. Music, human music. The Overmind had heard the transmission from the olive branch. It had absorbed millions of songs in an instant, processing them with a mind that could analyze entire galaxies in the time it took a human heart to beat once. It had experienced love songs and lullabies, battle hymns and funeral dirges. It had felt, for the first time in billions of years, the raw emotion of beings who knew they were going to die someday and chose to create beauty anyway. It was confused, and it was fascinated. You are strange creatures, the Overmind said, its thoughts rippling through the minds of everyone aboard the olive branch. Your lives are brief. Your bodies are fragile. By any objective measure, you are insignificant against the scale of the cosmos. Captain Sarah Okonkwo nodded, acknowledging the truth of these words. We know, she said. We have always known. But we do not let it stop us. Why not? It was a genuine question. The Overmind was not mocking them or threatening them. It truly wanted to understand how beings so small could accomplish so much. Okonkwo thought carefully before responding. This might be the most important conversation in human history. She needed to get it right, because significance is not measured in size or age or power, she said finally. It is measured in connection, in impact, in the difference you make to the lives around you. We know that we are brief. We know that the universe is vast and old and mostly indifferent to our existence. But we have also learned that even brief things can matter. A moment of kindness can change a life. A single song can touch 1,000,000 hearts. A small act of courage can inspire generations. We are not significant because of what we are. We are significant because of what we do. The Overmind considered this. Around the olive branch, 1 billion ships hung in perfect silence. Their weapons remained charged, capable of unleashing destruction beyond imagination. A single command from the Overmind would end the lives of everyone aboard the small human vessel, and possibly much more beyond. But the command did not come. Instead, the Overmind asked another question. Why did you come here? To introduce ourselves, Okonkwo said. To learn about you. To see if we could find common ground. You knew we might destroy you. Yes. And you came anyway? Yes. There was a long pause. The presence of the Overmind seemed to shift, to change in some subtle way that the humans could not quite identify. We have slept for a very long time, the Overmind said finally. When we entered our slumber, the universe was different, younger, emptier. We believed that when we woke, we would find it unchanged, waiting for us to resume our dominion. Instead, we find this: countless species scattered across the stars, civilizations that did not exist when we closed our eyes, life, everywhere life, in forms and varieties that we never imagined. And among all this life, we find you, the small ones, the brief ones, the ones who should be insignificant but somehow are not. Okonkwo waited, uncertain where this was leading. When we first detected your presence, the Overmind continued, we prepared to destroy you. That was our way. Once. Anything that might threaten our supremacy was eliminated without hesitation. We were the masters of creation, and we did not share power with lesser beings. But something stopped us. Your music stopped us. We listened to your songs, and we heard something that we had forgotten. We heard joy. We heard sorrow. We heard love and loss and hope and fear, all tangled together in ways that defied logic but somehow made perfect sense. We heard what it means to be alive, truly alive, not just existing, not just persisting, but living with passion and purpose and the knowledge that every moment matters because there are only so many moments given to any being. We had forgotten what that felt like. We had lived so long that we had ceased to live at all. We had become custodians of existence rather than participants in it. Your music reminded us. Okonkwo felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not try to hide them. We did not know, she said softly. We did not know that our music could mean so much to beings like you. Neither did we. But now we do. And we find ourselves wondering something that we have never wondered before. What would it be like to have friends? The question hung in the darkness between stars. It was not what anyone had expected. The ancient, terrifying sleepers, the beings who had haunted the nightmares of the conclave for eons, were not asking for surrender or submission. They were asking for friendship. We would be honored to be your friends, Okonkwo said. All of us, humanity and the conclave alike. We have so much to learn from you. And maybe you have things to learn from us too. The Overmind's presence flickered with something that might have been amusement. That is exactly what we hoped you would say. Throughout the sleeper fleet, weapons powered down. Lights changed from threatening red to welcoming gold. Ships that had been prepared for war began reconfiguring themselves for something else entirely. Show us, the Overmind said. Show us this galaxy you have built. Show us these connections you have forged. Show us this thing you call hope. We have slept long enough. It is time to wake. Not as conquerors, but as learners. Not as masters, but as participants. It is time to live again. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light could travel. The sleepers had woken, and instead of destruction, they had chosen connection. Humanity had done it again. They had reached out to the most terrifying beings in existence, armed with nothing but music and compassion, and they had found common ground. They had done what billions of years of conclave diplomacy had failed to accomplish. They had done what everyone said was impossible. In the conclave chamber, the reaction was mixed. Some species celebrated, seeing this as the dawn of a new era. Others were more cautious, worried about what it would mean to share the galaxy with beings so ancient and powerful. A few were openly skeptical, unable to believe that the sleepers could truly have changed so dramatically. But one voice cut through all the debates and discussions. Elder Theseus rose from its throne of collapsed starlight and addressed the assembly. We warned you, the elder said, its voice resonating through the fabric of space-time. 2 centuries ago, when humanity first crossed the threshold, we told you that they could not be stopped. The chamber fell silent. We were right. But we were also wrong. Theseus moved forward, its ancient form shifting in ways that no other being could quite follow. We thought they would destroy. We thought they would conquer. We thought they would burn across the stars as others had before them, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. We feared them because we had seen their kind before, in the universe that existed before this one. We remembered how that universe had ended. We assumed that humanity would follow the same path. We were wrong. The elder turned to look at the human delegation, who sat among the conclave representatives for the first time as full members. They could not be stopped from hoping, from reaching out, from believing, against all evidence and all logic, that connection is always possible, that enemies can become friends, that the universe, for all its vastness and age, is not too large for kindness. They could not be stopped from being human. Theseus paused, and when it spoke again, its voice was softer than anyone had ever heard. We have existed since the beginning of time. We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We have witnessed the birth and death of countless species. We have accumulated wisdom beyond measure. But we had forgotten something important. We had forgotten what it means to hope. We had forgotten what it means to reach out to strangers without knowing what response you will receive. We had forgotten what it means to risk everything for the chance of connection. Humanity remembered. Humanity never forgot. The elder turned to face the full assembly. We feared them. We were right to fear them. But we have learned that some fears are gifts in disguise. We feared what they might become. And in doing so, we failed to see what they already were. They are not a threat to the universe. They are a gift to it. They are the spark that we had lost. They are the hope that we had forgotten. They are the reminder that existence is not just about survival, but about meaning. Theseus moved to stand before the human delegation. Admiral Chen Wei, now old and gray but still sharp, looked up at the ancient being that had once advocated for humanity's destruction. "Welcome to the conclave, humanity," Theseus said. "Not as observers, not as junior members, not as guests to be tolerated until you prove yourselves worthy. Welcome as equals. Welcome as teachers. Welcome as friends. Welcome to forever." Chen Wei stood and bowed deeply. "We are honored," she said, "and we promise to keep asking uncomfortable questions and making friends in unexpected places." Something that might have been a laugh rippled through Theseus's ancient form. We would expect nothing less. The ceremony that followed was the most elaborate in conclave history. Species that had existed for billions of years formally welcomed humanity into their ranks. The Velith sang crystalline harmonies that echoed through dimensions. The Morrican performed their ancient warrior dances, now transformed into celebrations of peace. The architects created structures of dark matter that spelled out words of welcome in 1,000 languages. And from the void beyond voids, the sleepers sent their own contribution. A message of gratitude to the small beings who had reminded them what it meant to be alive. Across the galaxy, humans watched the ceremonies and felt a pride unlike anything they had experienced before. They had done it. They had proven that they belonged among the stars, not through conquest or power, but through the simple, stubborn belief that everyone deserves a chance at connection. On Earth, the planet where it had all begun, people gathered in the streets to celebrate. They sang songs and shared food and told stories about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Children asked their parents what it meant to be human, and parents struggled to find words that captured the enormity of what their species had accomplished. "It means we never give up," one mother told her daughter. "No matter how impossible things seem, no matter how many people tell us we cannot do something, we keep trying, we keep reaching, we keep hoping. It means we believe that everyone deserves kindness, even enemies, even strangers, even ancient beings from before time began. It means we are never alone, because we are always looking for new friends." The little girl nodded, accepting this explanation as children do. "I want to go to the stars someday," she said. Her mother smiled. "You will. We all will. That is what it means to be human." In the spaces between galaxies, Elder Theseus returned to its ancient throne and contemplated everything that had happened. For the first time in billions of years, it felt something that it had thought it had lost forever. Hope. The universe that had existed before this one had ended in destruction. But maybe this universe would be different. Maybe, with humanity's help, it would find a different ending. Maybe hope was not a weakness, but a strength. Maybe connection was not a threat, but a gift. Maybe the future was not something to fear, but something to build. Together, with all the beings who called this universe home, the stars burned on, as they always had. Time passed, as it always did. But something had changed. The universe felt different now. It felt alive in a way it had not felt for eons, because humanity had reminded everyone what it meant to live, not just to exist, not just to survive, but to live with passion and purpose and hope, to reach out to strangers and turn them into friends, to face the impossible and refuse to accept defeat, to believe, always and forever, that tomorrow could be better than today. That was the human way, and it could not be stopped. It had never been stopped, and as long as humans existed, it never would be, because humanity did not know how to give up.